Every mystery leaves behind clues. Every clue tells a story. Welcome to Dark Case Files. Tonight, we travel deep into the frozen wilderness of the Ural Mountains, where 9 experienced hikers vanished under circumstances so strange that, more than 60 years later, people still debate what truly happened. They fled their tent in the dead of night. Barefoot. Underdressed. Into temperatures cold enough to kill within minutes. Some were found frozen. Others suffered devastating injuries. And one question remains. What terrified them enough to abandon safety and run into the darkness? Imagine you're camping in one of the coldest places on Earth. Outside, the wind howls across an endless landscape of snow. Inside your tent, 9 friends settle down for the night. You're exhausted from a difficult journey. Tomorrow, you'll continue your expedition. Everything seems normal. Then suddenly something happens. Something so frightening that everyone inside cuts their way out of the tent instead of using the entrance. Nobody takes proper clothing. Nobody takes essential supplies. Nobody takes boots. And everyone runs into the freezing darkness. By morning, all 9 will be dead. What happened that night on the slopes of a mountain known by local Mansi people as Dead Mountain? To understand the mystery of Dyatlov Pass, we first need to travel back to the Soviet Union of 1959. The world was divided by the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union competed not only through military power and technological achievement, but also through demonstrations of endurance, discipline, and national pride. Across the Soviet Union, young people were encouraged to embrace challenges that tested both mind and body. Universities sponsored outdoor clubs. Sports organizations organized expeditions into some of the most remote regions of the country. Winter hiking and mountaineering were considered more than hobbies. They were symbols of determination, self-reliance, and resilience. Among the most ambitious of these challenges were long-distance ski expeditions through the vast wilderness of the Ural Mountains. Stretching for thousands of kilometers, the Urals form a natural boundary between Europe and Asia. During winter, temperatures can plunge far below freezing. Fierce winds sweep across open slopes. Visibility can disappear in minutes. In such conditions, experience is not optional. It is the difference between survival and death. It was into this unforgiving landscape that a group of 10 young adventurers set out in January of 1959. The expedition was led by Igor Dyatlov. At just 23 years old, Dyatlov was already recognized as a skilled and dependable outdoorsman. He was a radio engineering student at the Ural Polytechnical Institute in Sverdlovsk, known today as Ekaterinburg. Fellow students described him as organized, intelligent, and methodical. He had successfully completed several demanding expeditions and had earned the trust of those willing to follow him into the wilderness. Dyatlov personally designed the route. The goal was to reach Mount Otorden, a remote peak in the northern Urals. The journey would cover hundreds of kilometers through isolated terrain during one of the harshest months of the year. The route had been officially reviewed and approved by the regional sports authorities responsible for regulating wilderness expeditions. This was not an ordinary hiking trip. In the Soviet classification system, the expedition was rated Category 3, the highest difficulty level available at the time. Completion of the route would qualify participants for the most prestigious hiking certification in the country. Every member of the group had previous ski tour experience and had already demonstrated the skills necessary to undertake such a challenge. These were not reckless thrill seekers. They were trained, experienced, and accustomed to operating in severe winter conditions. The group included 2 women and 8 men. Each brought a unique personality to the expedition. Igor Dyatlov was the planner and leader. Zinaida Kolmogorova, often called Zina, was known for her energy, optimism, and determination. Friends remembered her as sociable and adventurous. She was one of the most experienced hikers in the group and had completed numerous expeditions before joining this journey. Yuri Doroshenko was known for his physical strength and endurance. Fellow hikers described him as dependable under pressure. He had experience facing difficult weather conditions and was considered one of the group's strongest members. Ludmila Dubinina, often called Luda, was among the youngest members of the expedition. Despite her age, she had already earned a reputation for resilience and courage. Previous expeditions had exposed her to serious hardships, yet she continued to pursue increasingly difficult challenges. Rustam Slobodin was an engineering graduate and accomplished athlete. He enjoyed long-distance running and was known for his determination and discipline. Alexander Kolevatov brought a calm and analytical personality to the team. Having studied physics, he was respected for his intelligence and practical mindset. Friends often described him as thoughtful and reliable. Georgii Krivonischenko, known to friends as Georgii or Yura, was an engineering graduate with a cheerful personality and a sense of humor that helped keep morale high during difficult journeys. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol came from a family of French ancestry. Athletic and energetic, he was known for his enthusiasm and willingness to take on difficult challenges. Semyon Zolotaryov was the oldest member of the group at 38 years old. Unlike most of the others, he was not a current student. A veteran of the Second World War, he brought years of life experience and outdoor expertise to the expedition. He joined the team shortly before departure and quickly became part of the group. And then there was Yuri Yudin. Yudin was one of Dyatlov's close companions and a full member of the expedition. Like the others, he had trained for the journey and expected to complete the route alongside his friends. At the time, there was no reason to believe his story would be different from theirs. On January 23, 1959, the group departed Sverdlovsk. They traveled north by train to the town of Ivdel, then continued toward the last inhabited settlement before the wilderness. From there, they began their ski trek into the remote northern Urals. Along the way they kept journals, wrote diary entries, and took photographs that would later become invaluable to investigators trying to reconstruct their final days. But early in the journey, an unexpected problem emerged. Yuri Yudin began suffering from worsening health issues. He had a history of medical problems, including joint pain and rheumatic conditions. As the expedition progressed, the pain became increasingly difficult to manage. Eventually, he faced a decision. Continue and risk becoming a burden to the group. Or turn back. For an experienced hiker, it was a painful choice. Yet Yudin understood the realities of wilderness travel. A single injured member could jeopardize an entire expedition. On January 28, he made the difficult decision to leave the group and return home. His companions continued toward the mountains while he retraced his steps alone. Before separating, the group exchanged farewells. At the time, it seemed temporary. They expected to see one another again in a few weeks. There was no indication that anything was wrong. No warning of the mystery that would soon unfold. Yuri Yudin watched his friends disappear into the snow-covered wilderness. One by one, they vanished into the distance. It was the last time he would ever see them alive. Without realizing it, Yuri Yudin had just become the sole survivor of the Dyatlov expedition. The story of the Dyatlov Pass mystery is unusual because the victims left behind a remarkably detailed record of their journey. Unlike many historical mysteries, investigators were not forced to rely entirely on witness testimony or second-hand accounts. The hikers themselves documented much of their expedition. They kept journals. They wrote diary entries. They took photographs. They recorded observations about the weather, terrain, and daily events. Months later, when search teams recovered cameras from the abandoned campsite, those photographs would provide a haunting glimpse into the group's final days. The images tell the story of a team that appeared confident, organized, and in good spirits. Nothing in those photographs suggests the tragedy that was about to unfold. On January 23, 1959, the expedition departed Sverdlovsk. The group traveled by train toward the northern regions of the Soviet Union. The journey was long. As the train carried them deeper into the country, urban landscapes gradually gave way to forests, frozen rivers, and isolated settlements. Photographs from the trip show the hikers smiling inside train cars, talking with fellow passengers, and enjoying the excitement of the adventure ahead. Like many young explorers, they seemed eager to leave civilization behind. Their destination lay far beyond the last roads and villages. As they moved northward, temperatures continued to drop. Eventually, the team arrived in Ivdel, a small industrial town situated near the edge of the wilderness. For many travelers, Ivdel represented the end of civilization. For the Dyatlov group, it was only another step toward their objective. From Ivdel, they continued to Vizhay, a small logging settlement that served as one of the last inhabited locations before the vast northern wilderness. The villagers who encountered the hikers later remembered them as cheerful and enthusiastic. The expedition members purchased supplies, made final preparations, and organized their equipment. No one could have imagined that these ordinary interactions would become part of one of the 20th century's most enduring mysteries. On January 27, the group officially began the wilderness portion of the expedition. The hikers strapped on their skis and headed north. Ahead of them lay hundreds of kilometers of snow-covered terrain. The route would test their endurance, navigation skills, and ability to survive in some of the harshest winter conditions in the Soviet Union. Yet this was exactly the kind of challenge they had trained for. The first days progressed largely as expected. The group traveled through forests and valleys, crossing frozen streams and navigating deep snow. The hikers worked together efficiently. Expedition journals reveal a team operating with discipline and good humor. They joked with one another. They sang songs. They recorded amusing incidents in their diaries. At night, they gathered inside tents to share meals and discuss the next day's route. The photographs taken during these early stages show relaxed faces and confident smiles. There is little indication of concern. The journey appears to be proceeding normally. As the expedition advanced farther into the wilderness, conditions became increasingly difficult. Snowfall intensified. Temperatures dropped lower. The terrain became steeper and more exposed. Nevertheless, the hikers continued making steady progress toward Mount Otorten. The group's journals reveal a strong sense of camaraderie. Several entries contain humorous sketches and playful comments. Even in harsh conditions, morale appears remarkably high. One diary entry jokes about the challenges of winter travel. Another describes the expedition's daily routines. Together, these records paint a picture of a close-knit team enjoying the adventure despite the hardships. The final journal entries are particularly striking because they contain none of the fear or anxiety one might expect from people approaching a deadly disaster. Instead, they read like the ordinary notes of experienced hikers engaged in a demanding but manageable expedition. As January came to an end, the group moved deeper into the mountains. The forests gradually thinned. Open slopes began replacing sheltered valleys. The environment became more exposed to wind and weather. On January 31, the hikers reached the upper reaches of the mountain region near their intended route toward Mount Otorten. This marked an important milestone. They established a supply cache by leaving behind some food and equipment for use on their return journey. The decision reduced the weight they would need to carry during the most difficult portion of the expedition. Photographs from that day show the team preparing equipment and continuing their trek across the snow-covered landscape. Everything appears routine. Nothing appears unusual. Yet January 31 would be the final full day in which the expedition remained entirely on schedule. The next day would change everything. February 1, 1959. The morning began with the group continuing toward their objective. Their plan was straightforward. They would move across the mountain terrain and position themselves for the next stage of the journey. However, weather conditions began to deteriorate. Strong winds swept across the slopes. Snow reduced visibility. Navigating became increasingly difficult. The terrain offered few landmarks. In such conditions, even experienced hikers could become disoriented. At some point during the day, the group drifted west of their intended route. Instead of moving directly toward their objective, they found themselves on the eastern slope of a mountain known as Kolet Syakhl. In the language of the local Mansi people, the name is often translated as Dead Mountain. The name would later become one of the most famous details associated with the case. Contrary to popular myths, however, the mountain's name existed long before the expedition arrived. It was simply part of the region's geography. As daylight began to fade, the hikers faced an important decision. They could descend into the nearby forest and seek shelter among the trees. Or they could establish camp on the exposed mountainside and continue the journey the following morning. For reasons that investigators and researchers continue to debate, the group chose to remain on the slope. Some experts believe they wanted to avoid losing altitude. Others suggest they preferred to maintain their planned route. Whatever their reasoning, the decision would become one of the most discussed aspects of the entire mystery. As darkness approached, the group began constructing camp. Photographs recovered from the scene appear to show the hikers cutting into the snow and preparing a platform for their tent. The work would have required significant effort. Strong winds swept across the mountainside. Temperatures were well below freezing. Yet the group carried out the task with the efficiency expected of experienced winter hikers. The tent was erected on the slope. Equipment was organized. The hikers settled in for the evening. It would be their final campsite. The final photographs taken by the expedition are among the most haunting images associated with the case. Not because they contain anything frightening, but because they do not. The images appear ordinary. Friends working together. Members of the group handling equipment. Figures moving through blowing snow. Routine scenes from a winter expedition. No signs of panic. No signs of conflict. No signs of danger. Nothing in those photographs suggests that within hours every member of the expedition would be fighting for survival. The cameras captured what appears to be a normal evening at camp. The group had successfully established their shelter. Their equipment remained intact. Their journey was continuing according to plan. As far as anyone could tell, the hikers were preparing for another night in the mountains before resuming their route toward Mount Otorten the next morning. But that morning would never come. Sometime after darkness fell on February 1st, something happened on the slopes of Kholat Syakhl. Something that caused 9 experienced hikers to leave the safety of their tent and step into one of the coldest nights imaginable. What happened next would puzzle investigators, researchers, and the public for generations. And the first clues would not be discovered until weeks later, when search teams finally reached the mountain. The Dyatlov group was expected to return from their expedition in mid-February. Before leaving, the hikers had informed friends and relatives that communication might be delayed due to the remote nature of the route. Such delays were not unusual. Winter expeditions often encountered bad weather, difficult terrain, and unexpected obstacles. As a result, when the group's expected return date passed without word, there was concern, but not immediate alarm. Initially, many assumed the hikers had simply fallen behind schedule. A few extra days in the wilderness was not considered extraordinary. However, as the days continued to pass, concern gradually turned into worry. Parents began contacting the Ural Polytechnical Institute. Friends sought information from university officials. Questions started to emerge. Where was the expedition? Why had no one heard from them? What was causing the delay? As anxiety increased, pressure mounted on local authorities to organize a search. By late February, volunteer search teams began preparing to enter the mountains. Students from the institute joined the effort. Experienced hikers volunteered their time. Military personnel and local authorities would later become involved as the operation expanded. At first, searchers hoped they would find the group delayed by weather, sheltering somewhere in the wilderness and waiting for conditions to improve. No one yet imagined the reality awaiting them. The search teams followed the planned route as closely as possible. Weather conditions remained difficult. Snow covered much of the landscape. Visibility often changed rapidly. The wilderness that had challenged the hikers now challenged the rescuers as well. Day after day, the search continued. Then, on February 26, 1959, searchers finally discovered the expedition's campsite. What they found immediately raised disturbing questions. Discovery of the tent. The tent stood on the eastern slope of Kholat Syakhl. At first glance, it appeared abandoned. Part of the structure had collapsed beneath snow. Yet investigators quickly noticed something unusual. The tent was not simply damaged by weather. It had been cut open. Several openings had been made in the fabric. Most importantly, evidence suggested that at least some of the cuts had originated from inside the tent. This observation would become one of the most significant details in the entire investigation. Why would experienced hikers slash their own tent? The normal entrance remained available. Yet for some reason, individuals inside appeared to have exited through the fabric itself. The mystery deepened as rescuers examined the campsite. Many of the hikers' belongings remained inside. Warm clothing. Personal items. Supplies. Equipment. Even more puzzling, several pairs of boots were still present. In temperatures far below freezing, experienced winter hikers would never willingly leave shelter without proper footwear unless they believed they had no choice. Food remained inside the tent. Maps remained behind. Essential survival equipment had not been taken. Nothing suggested an orderly departure. Whatever had happened appeared sudden. The tent looked less like a campsite being packed for departure and more like a shelter abandoned in extreme haste. Investigators then discovered another crucial clue. Tracks leading away from the campsite. Footprints descended the slope toward a nearby forest approximately 1.5 kilometers away. The tracks suggested multiple individuals had left the tent together. Some appeared barefoot. Others wore only socks. A few seemed to have minimal footwear. The footprints were among the earliest indications that the group had left camp voluntarily rather than being physically removed by an outside force. The question was no longer whether they had left. The question was why. Searchers followed the trail toward the forest below. What they found there only deepened the mystery. First bodies found. At the edge of the forest stood a large cedar tree. Beneath its branches, searchers discovered the first two victims. They were identified as Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivonischenko. The condition of the bodies immediately attracted attention. Both men were dressed inadequately for the severe weather. Neither wore the level of winter protection necessary to survive such temperatures. Investigators noted evidence suggesting that a fire had been built beneath the cedar tree. Charred wood and burned branches indicated an attempt to generate warmth. Some branches high above the ground showed signs of damage. It appeared someone had climbed the tree. Investigators would later speculate that members of the group may have attempted to gain a better view of the mountainside or locate the tent in the darkness. The scene raised difficult questions. If the hikers had successfully reached the forest, why had they remained there? Why had they not returned to the tent? And what had caused them to leave the safety of their shelter in the first place? As the search continued, additional discoveries began to reveal a possible sequence of events. More discoveries. Between the cedar tree and the abandoned tent, search teams located 3 more bodies. The first was Igor Dyatlov himself. The expedition leader was found lying in the snow facing uphill toward the campsite. Not far away lay Zinaida Kolmogorova. Farther along the same path, rescuers discovered Rustam Slobodin. The positions of the bodies immediately drew attention. All 3 appeared to be located along a line leading from the forest back toward the tent. To some investigators, the arrangement suggested a desperate attempt to return. Perhaps after reaching the shelter of the forest, some members of the group had decided to make their way back to camp. If so, they never reached it. The weather conditions that night would have made survival extraordinarily difficult. Extreme cold. Strong winds. Deep snow. Darkness. Even highly experienced hikers would have faced enormous challenges under such circumstances. Autopsies later indicated that these individuals had died from hypothermia. Yet the overall mystery remained unresolved. 5 members of the expedition had now been located. 4 remained missing. Search teams continued combing the area. Weeks passed. Winter gradually gave way to spring. Snow began to melt. Still, no trace of the remaining hikers could be found. Then, months later, the investigation entered a new and unexpected phase. The remaining 4. On May 4th, more than 2 months after the tent had been discovered, searchers located the final 4 members of the expedition. The bodies were found in a ravine within the forest, beneath several meters of snow. Unlike the earlier discoveries, this scene presented investigators with entirely new questions. The 4 victims were identified as Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibeaux-Brignol, and Semyon Zolotaryov. Evidence suggested they had reached a different location from the others. Investigators found indications that a shelter or snow den may have been constructed in the area. Branches and materials appeared to have been arranged in an apparent effort to create protection from the elements. This suggested that at least some members of the group had attempted organized survival measures after leaving the tent. But the most shocking discoveries involved the injuries. Several of the victims had suffered severe trauma. Nikolai Thibeaux-Brignol exhibited major skull damage. Semyon Zolotaryov and Lyudmila Dubinina suffered extensive chest injuries. Medical examiners noted that some of the trauma resembled injuries typically associated with powerful impacts. The force involved appeared significant. Yet investigators reported something unusual. There were relatively few external wounds corresponding to the severity of the internal damage. No obvious signs of a prolonged struggle were identified. No evidence indicated an attack by another group of people. No weapon was recovered. No signs of armed conflict were found. The injuries themselves became one of the most controversial aspects of the case. How had such trauma occurred? What force could have produced injuries of this magnitude in a remote mountain wilderness? And why did some victims appear to have survived long enough after leaving the tent to organize shelter and survival efforts? As investigators attempted to answer these questions, additional details emerged that would fuel decades of speculation. Each new discovery seemed to create as many questions as answers. The mystery was no longer limited to why the hikers had left their tent. Now investigators faced an even larger puzzle. How had 9 experienced outdoor enthusiasts become scattered across a frozen mountainside? Why had they separated? What sequence of events had unfolded between the moment they abandoned camp and the moment each person died? The Soviet investigation would spend months examining these questions. Yet despite extensive efforts, the official conclusions would leave many observers dissatisfied. And some of the strangest revelations were still to come. By the spring of 1959, investigators had recovered all 9 members of the Dyatlov expedition. The victims had been located. Autopsies had been conducted. Evidence had been collected. Yet instead of providing clarity, the investigation seemed to deepen the mystery. Each discovery generated new questions. Each answer appeared to reveal another layer of uncertainty. What initially looked like a tragic wilderness accident was becoming something far more difficult to explain. The most controversial details centered on the condition of several bodies. While many of the hikers appeared to have died primarily from exposure to extreme cold, some displayed injuries that investigators considered highly unusual. Among the most significant findings were severe internal injuries suffered by several members of the group. Medical reports documented extensive chest trauma in both Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol suffered major skull damage. According to investigators, the force required to produce such injuries was considerable. Yet the bodies displayed relatively limited external wounds. This detail attracted immediate attention. Normally, injuries involving such powerful impacts might be expected to leave substantial visible damage on the skin. Instead, examiners observed a pattern that many found difficult to understand. Some later investigators compared the force involved to that experienced during major vehicle collisions. However, no vehicles were present. No evidence suggested an attack involving conventional weapons. No signs of a violent struggle were discovered in the snow. No footprints belonging to unknown individuals were identified near the campsite. The injuries existed, but the mechanism responsible remained uncertain. As details emerged, public fascination grew. Could the hikers have encountered a military experiment? Had they unknowingly entered a restricted area? Were secret weapons tests taking place nearby? These questions quickly began circulating among researchers and the public. However, the significance of the radiation findings remains debated. Some experts have noted that certain members of the expedition had previously worked in environments where radioactive contamination may have been present. Others argue that the levels detected were not necessarily extraordinary by the standards of the era. Nevertheless, the presence of radiation became one of the most frequently cited elements in alternative explanations of the case. The mystery was no longer confined to a remote mountain. It was beginning to intersect with broader fears surrounding the Cold War. As investigators continued reviewing evidence, further unusual descriptions appeared in official documents and witness accounts. Some reports referenced an unusual coloration observed on certain bodies. Descriptions varied. In some accounts, skin appeared orange or darkened. To many readers, these descriptions sounded alarming. Over time, they fueled speculation about radiation exposure, chemical contamination, or other unknown phenomena. Yet forensic experts have noted that environmental conditions, decomposition processes, sunlight exposure, and preservation within snow can all affect the appearance of human remains. Still, within the growing mythology surrounding the Dyatlov Pass mystery, the reports became another piece of the puzzle. Another unexplained element involved reports of strange lights observed in the sky during the period surrounding the incident. Several witnesses from the region later described seeing glowing objects or unusual aerial phenomena. Some reports came from hikers. Others originated from military personnel or residents living in nearby areas. Descriptions varied considerably. Some observers reported bright spheres moving across the sky. Others described orange lights visible in the distance. The timing of these reports led many to wonder whether they might somehow be connected to the deaths. Could military testing have occurred nearby? Were rockets operating in the region? Did the lights have any connection to the hikers' sudden departure from their tent? Decades later, no definitive link has been established. Yet the reports remain part of the broader mystery. The possibility that unknown events may have occurred in the skies above the northern Urals continues to fascinate researchers. By this stage, the investigation had accumulated an extraordinary collection of unusual details. Severe internal injuries. Missing soft tissue. Radioactive traces. Reports of strange lights. Conflicting interpretations. With every new detail, the case became less clear. Instead of answers, investigators found more questions. Soviet secrecy. As public interest grew, another factor complicated the search for truth. The nature of the Soviet system itself. In the Soviet Union of 1959, information was tightly controlled. Investigations involving unexplained deaths, military activities, or matters considered sensitive by authorities were not always fully disclosed to the public. As a result, many aspects of the Dyatlov investigation remained inaccessible for years. The official inquiry proceeded throughout the spring of 1959. Investigators interviewed witnesses, reviewed evidence, conducted autopsies, examined photographs and journals recovered from the expedition. Yet many records remained difficult to access outside official channels. The public received only limited information. Questions continued to circulate. Rumors spread. Speculation flourished. Then, in May 1959, the criminal investigation was formally closed. Rather than providing a detailed explanation of exactly what had occurred on the slopes of Kholat Syakhl, authorities issued a conclusion that many considered unsatisfying. According to the official finding, the hikers had died as a result of what was described as a spontaneous or compelling natural force that they were unable to overcome. The wording immediately raised eyebrows. What exactly was a compelling natural force? An avalanche? Extreme weather? Something else entirely? The report did not provide a definitive answer. For some observers, the phrase sounded less like an explanation and more like an acknowledgement that investigators themselves remained uncertain. Questions persisted. Why had the tent been cut open? Why had experienced hikers fled into the cold? What caused the severe injuries? How did the events unfold during those final hours? The investigation offered no complete reconstruction. As years passed, access to information remained limited. Certain areas associated with the incident were reportedly subject to restrictions. Official records were not always readily available. The combination of unanswered questions and limited transparency proved powerful. Where information is scarce, speculation often grows. And in the absence of certainty, theories multiplied. Some believed the truth had been hidden. Others believed investigators simply lacked sufficient evidence. Regardless of the explanation, the result was the same. The Dyatlov Pass case refused to fade away. Instead, it evolved into one of the most debated mysteries of the 20th century. More than 60 years later, researchers are still attempting to understand what happened during those final hours on the mountain. And as we move into the next chapter, we examine the competing theories that seek to explain the deaths of the Dyatlov hikers. Some rely on science. Some rely on circumstance. And some venture far beyond the boundaries of conventional explanation. More than 6 decades after the deaths of the Dyatlov hikers, one simple question continues to divide investigators, scientists, historians, and amateur researchers around the world. What happened on the night of February 1, 1959? Over the years, countless explanations have been proposed. Some rely on established science. Others rely on assumptions and speculation. A few venture into the realm of the extraordinary. No theory has answered every question, but several stand out as the most frequently discussed explanations. Theory 1: Avalanche. Today, the avalanche theory is generally considered the leading explanation among many researchers and scientific investigators. At first glance, the idea seems straightforward. A mass of snow shifted above the campsite. The movement created a sudden threat. Believing they were in immediate danger, the hikers evacuated the tent as quickly as possible. The theory gained significant attention following modern studies conducted decades after the incident. Researchers suggested that a specific type of slab avalanche could potentially explain several aspects of the case. Unlike the massive avalanches often shown in movies, slab avalanches can involve a compact section of snow suddenly breaking loose and sliding downhill. Even a relatively small snow slide can exert tremendous force. According to supporters of this theory, the hikers may have heard cracking sounds in the snowpack or felt pressure building above the tent. Faced with what appeared to be an imminent collapse, they may have cut their way out of the shelter and fled downslope. This explanation aligns with several key pieces of evidence. It helps explain the rushed evacuation. It accounts for why boots and warm clothing remained inside. It offers a reason why experienced hikers might abandon safety despite freezing temperatures. Supporters also argue that some of the severe chest injuries could potentially result from compression forces associated with heavy snow. The theory gained additional credibility when modern computer modeling suggested that snow conditions on the slope may have been capable of producing such an event. Yet despite its strengths, the avalanche theory faces several challenges. Perhaps the most significant involves the observations made by search teams. When rescuers arrived weeks later, they did not report obvious signs of a large avalanche. The tent remained partially visible. Some footprints leading away from the campsite were still distinguishable. To critics, this seems inconsistent with the aftermath of a major snow slide. Others point out that the slope itself appears relatively gentle compared to locations commonly associated with avalanches. Supporters counter that wind-driven snow and the passage of time may have altered the scene before rescuers arrived. Even today, the debate continues. The avalanche theory explains many aspects of the mystery. But for some researchers, it does not explain everything. Theory 2: Katabatic winds. Another natural explanation focuses not on snow movement, but on the wind. Specifically, a phenomenon known as katabatic winds. Katabatic winds occur when extremely cold, dense air rapidly flows downhill under the force of gravity. In certain environments, these winds can reach extraordinary speeds. The effect has been documented in mountainous and polar regions around the world. Supporters of this theory suggest that unusually powerful winds may have developed around the campsite during the night. If conditions became severe enough, the hikers may have feared their tent would collapse or be destroyed. Some researchers believe the combination of darkness, blowing snow, and extreme wind could have created a terrifying situation. Visibility may have dropped to nearly zero. The group could have become disoriented after leaving the tent. Once separated from their shelter, returning in the darkness may have become extremely difficult. This theory has several strengths. It does not require a large avalanche. It helps explain why the hikers moved toward the relative shelter of the forest. It also fits with the harsh weather conditions known to exist in the region. However, the theory has weaknesses. Katabatic winds alone do not clearly explain the severe injuries observed on some victims. Nor do they fully account for the apparent urgency with which the group abandoned the tent. While powerful winds may have contributed to the tragedy, many researchers believe additional factors would still be necessary to explain the entire sequence of events. Theory 3: Military testing. Among the most controversial explanations is the possibility of military activity. This theory emerged largely because of the Cold War environment in which the incident occurred. The Soviet Union conducted extensive weapons development programs during this period. Large areas of the country were used for military testing. Government secrecy was common. As a result, some researchers began wondering whether the hikers had unknowingly encountered a classified operation. Several variations of this theory exist. Some propose that military rockets were being tested in the region. Others suggest experimental explosives. A few speculate about secret weapons systems. Supporters point to reports of unusual lights observed in the sky. They also note the traces of radiation discovered on certain items of clothing. Combined with the Soviet government's limited transparency, these details have fueled decades of speculation. According to some versions of the theory, the hikers may have witnessed a military event and become caught in its consequences. Perhaps they were exposed to a shock wave. Perhaps an explosion occurred nearby. Perhaps classified activities left evidence that authorities later sought to conceal. The theory certainly captures the imagination. Yet it faces a major problem. There is no definitive evidence linking military testing to the deaths. No documents have emerged proving such an operation occurred at the campsite. No physical evidence conclusively connects the hikers to a military accident. While some questions remain unresolved, the theory continues to rely heavily on circumstantial observations and speculation. As a result, many researchers view it as possible but unproven. Theory 4, Infrasound. One of the more unusual scientific explanations involves a phenomenon known as infrasound. Infrasound refers to extremely low-frequency sound waves that are generally below the range of normal human hearing. Although people cannot consciously hear these frequencies, some studies suggest they may influence emotions and physical sensations under certain circumstances. Supporters of this theory argue that strong winds moving around the mountain's terrain could have generated powerful infrasound waves. According to the hypothesis, these vibrations may have triggered intense feelings of fear, anxiety, panic, or confusion among the hikers. The group could have experienced overwhelming psychological distress without understanding its source. In a state of panic, they may have abruptly abandoned the tent. Only later, after moving away from the source of the vibrations, would they have regained their composure. By then, however, they were already exposed to life-threatening weather conditions. The infrasound theory offers an intriguing explanation for the sudden evacuation. It requires no avalanche. No military activity. No external attackers. Yet it remains controversial. Scientific evidence supporting such dramatic behavioral effects remains limited. Critics argue that the theory relies on assumptions that are difficult to verify. Additionally, it does little to explain the severe physical injuries suffered by several members of the group. As a result, many researchers consider it an interesting possibility rather than a complete explanation. Theory 5, Paranormal explanations. No discussion of the Dyatlov Pass mystery would be complete without addressing the theories that have captured public imagination for decades. These explanations often focus on the unusual aspects of the case. The reported lights in the sky. The severe injuries. The remote wilderness. The unanswered questions. Over the years, some individuals have proposed that unidentified flying objects may have been involved. According to these theories, strange aerial phenomena observed in the region were connected to the deaths. Others speculate about unknown creatures inhabiting the wilderness. Stories involving mysterious beings have appeared in books, documentaries, and online discussions. Local folklore has also occasionally been referenced, with some pointing to legends associated with the remote northern mountains. These explanations often attract attention because they attempt to address aspects of the mystery that conventional theories struggle to explain. However, they face a significant challenge. There is currently no verified evidence supporting any paranormal involvement. No physical evidence links UFOs to the incident. No credible evidence supports the presence of unknown creatures. No investigation has produced findings that confirm supernatural explanations. Nevertheless, these theories continue to thrive because the case itself remains emotionally compelling. Where uncertainty exists, imagination often follows. The Dyatlov Pass mystery contains all the ingredients necessary for speculation. Isolation. Danger. Unanswered questions. And a tragic ending. These theories remain popular online. However, none have been supported by conclusive evidence. And that leaves us facing the same question investigators encountered more than 60 years ago. If no single theory explains every detail, then what really happened on that mountain? To answer that question, we must examine where the case stands today, and why the mystery continues to endure long after the snow of 1959 has melted away. For many mysteries, the passage of time gradually reduces public interest. Witnesses fade from memory. Evidence disappears. Questions become impossible to answer. But the Dyatlov Pass mystery followed a different path. As decades passed, interest only seemed to grow. Researchers continued examining old documents. Historians revisited archived records. Scientists applied modern technology to evidence that investigators in 1959 could never have imagined analyzing. What had once been considered a closed Soviet-era case gradually evolved into an international mystery studied by experts around the world. In the decades following the incident, countless books, documentaries, articles, and investigations attempted to uncover the truth. Some focused on the original autopsy reports. Others re-examined photographs recovered from the campsite. Researchers studied weather conditions, terrain characteristics, snowpack behavior, and expedition records. Every generation seemed to approach the mystery from a new perspective. Yet despite all these efforts, complete certainty remained elusive. One of the most significant developments occurred when modern scientific studies revisited the avalanche hypothesis. Using contemporary snow science and computer modeling, researchers explored whether a delayed slab avalanche could account for the hikers' actions and injuries. Their findings suggested that under certain conditions, a relatively small but powerful snow slide might explain several aspects of the case. The sudden evacuation of the tent. The severe chest injury suffered by some victims. The apparent urgency with which the group abandoned shelter. For many observers, these studies represented the strongest scientific explanation yet proposed. The avalanche theory did not require secret weapons. It did not require unknown creatures. It did not require supernatural events. Instead, it relied on natural forces interacting with a group of experienced hikers in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Yet not everyone was convinced. Critics pointed out that important questions still remained. Some argued that the terrain appeared inconsistent with typical avalanche locations. Others noted that eyewitness observations from the search operation continued to raise concerns. Certain details remained open to interpretation. As a result, the debate continued. Today, many researchers believe some form of natural event likely played a significant role. But few claim the mystery has been solved beyond all doubt. More than 60 years later, investigators still cannot reconstruct every minute of the hikers' final hours. And that uncertainty remains at the heart of the story. What we know. Certain facts are supported by physical evidence. The hikers left their tent suddenly. The cuts in the tent and the pattern of footprints strongly suggest a rapid evacuation. They entered one of the coldest environments imaginable. Nighttime temperatures were far below freezing. Strong winds and deep snow created deadly conditions. The group attempted to survive. Evidence found near the cedar tree and within the ravine suggests efforts to build fires, seek shelter, and endure the night. And ultimately, none survived. 9 experienced hikers entered the mountains. 9 lives were lost. Those facts remain undisputed. What we don't know. Yet critical questions remain unanswered. We do not know the exact trigger that caused the hikers to leave the tent. We do not know the precise sequence of events that unfolded after they descended the slope. We do not know exactly how the group became separated. And perhaps most importantly, we do not know the exact cause of the panic that led experienced wilderness travelers to abandon the relative safety of their shelter. That missing piece, the event that occurred inside or near the tent during those crucial moments, continues to evade investigators. It is the gap in the story that no theory has completely filled. And it is why the mystery continues to fascinate people around the world. The Dyatlov Pass mystery endures because it exists at the boundary between what we know and what we can only imagine. Many mysteries survive because evidence is scarce. This one survives despite an abundance of evidence. We have photographs. We have journals. We have official reports. We have witness interviews. We have autopsies. We have scientific studies. And yet, the central question remains. What happened on the night of February 1, 1959? We know where the hikers traveled. We know the route they followed through the northern Ural Mountains. We know where they established their final camp. We know where their bodies were found. We know many of the events that followed. But the most important moment of all remains hidden. The moment that transformed an ordinary winter expedition into one of the world's most enduring mysteries. Somewhere between the final photographs and the first footprints leading away from the tent lies the answer. A moment measured not in days or hours, but perhaps only seconds. A sound. A movement. A decision. Something occurred that convinced 9 experienced hikers that remaining in their tent was more dangerous than stepping into a frozen wilderness at night. Perhaps the explanation is entirely natural. Perhaps a combination of weather, terrain, and human decision-making created a tragedy that appeared mysterious only because no survivors remained to explain it. Perhaps a chain of small events escalated into catastrophe. Or perhaps there are details we will never fully understand. Because the only people who witnessed those final moments never returned to tell their story. The snow eventually melted. The investigations ended. The years passed. But the mountain kept its secret. And more than 60 years later, the question still echoes across the frozen slopes of Kolat-Syakhl. What really happened at Dyatlov Pass? More than 60 years later, the mystery remains unsolved. 9 experienced hikers entered the mountains. Only their story returned. And even now, that story is missing its most important chapter. So what do you think happened on that mountain? Was it a delayed avalanche that forced the group from their tent? Did powerful weather conditions trigger a chain of fatal decisions? Could military activity have played a role? Or is there still a crucial piece of the puzzle waiting to be discovered? Let us know your theory in the comments below. We read every comment, and some of the best theories may be featured in future investigations. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most enduring mysteries, be sure to subscribe to Dark Case Files and turn on notifications so you never miss a new case. Every week, we explore true crime, unsolved mysteries, dark history, and strange events that continue to puzzle investigators around the world. And if there's a case you'd like us to investigate next, leave your suggestion below. Because every mystery leaves behind clues. Every clue tells a story. And somewhere out there, another case is waiting to be opened. Thank you for watching Dark Case Files. Until next time. Stay curious. Stay vigilant. And remember, some mysteries refuse to stay buried.